Good day, everyone, and welcome back to the Dr. Coach Show. I'm your host, Dr. Coach Danny Pueblos. And today I have my good friend, certified mental performance consultant, Dr. Elmer Castillo. How you doing today, Elmer?
I'm doing wonderful, man. No complaints. And happy to be here. Appreciate the invite, and I'm pumped up to talk shop here, man.
Absolutely. That's why I love bringing people like you on, man. We both have a shared love and desire for the mental side of performance. When I saw you, and I was like, man, this guy has different experiences, because I've had different guests on the show
Mm.
who work in sports and work in general clinical practice. And you have your feet in different, in a few different sectors, which is very unique, including the military, right?
Hmm.
And
Absolutely.
a
Yep.
lot of people who are not too keen on the field, or maybe have heard about, or they hear the sports psychology, they just hear sports, and then they don't realize we work with so many more than just people in the sports industry.
Sure.
Um, and so that's why I wanted to bring you on to get your perspective about kind of like, first of all, like, how you got started, and and up until where you are today. So feel free to like, kind of get us started on that, man.
Sure. Yeah. Um, so appreciate the introduction. Appreciate the invite, like I said, and get us started uh, in terms of how I got into the field. Start from there. So
Absolutely.
with that, I'd say I'd have a interesting transition into the field. I would call it more of a transition.
Mm,
So what I mean by that is I was not always 100% pursuing this specific field. For
mm,
most of the time, if I'm being honest, I was more on like a medical pathway
mm.
with my studies, and my undergraduate was primarily focused on health sciences, and at that time, I was preparing for and really looking forward to going into becoming a physician assistant. And
Okay.
I did that for X amount of years, and did the coursework and all that fun stuff. And then that evolved into, you know what? I'm thinking about physical therapy, and I looked into that, and then it was a pivot into the PT world, and I took a lot of the coursework, not a lot, I took all of the coursework for that. So I was 2 feet deep into that, and I did my master's in exercise science, exercise physiology, so the kinesiology background. Did that. I worked in a cardiology clinic for a year. So I also got that occupational experience along with the academic experience. So I did that, worked as an exercise phys for a year, doing exercise testing, exercise prescription, and enjoyed doing that full time. I always had an itch though. I didn't realize what it was. I just, I knew something was there. And then just one day started stumbling across this idea of psychology, but psychology for performance, psychology for sports, psychology for athletes, and things like that. And I love psychology, right? Every psychology course that I had taken up to date, always thoroughly enjoyed it. Um, and with that, I was like, okay, well, I didn't know this was there. I didn't know there was so many different, avenues, like potential outlets within the general field of psychology. And so once that caught my attention, primarily through a presentation, these were like the early days of like Google and stuff. So I did my research and just started Googling different, things, schools, programs, what does it take? And that, that was, that was my scratch. I was like, oh, that's how I'm going to get to really address this itch here, because I love the physical and the physiological component to performance, and to optimizing productivity in that way. But the psychological always appealed to me too. um, And once I found this, I was like, oh, that's it right there. And then that was my the transition that led me into the sport and performance psychology field, and ultimately to Florida State University when I was living in Florida. So yeah, and here we are.
Yeah, and that's awesome background, man. Because that's why I love asking that question for all my guests, because as we talked about before, it's everyone's on their different journey. Everyone has a different path,
Yeah,
to where we are today. Um, and that's why I just love hearing the stories, from all of my guests on the show. So,
yeah,
um,
yeah.
and I know you're currently working with Magellan Federal, correct?
That's correct. Yep.
Okay. So
Yep.
talk to me about that. Talk to me about your experience. And kind of, I know you went up the physio, the phys route, and kind of like started to trend towards mental performance, and
Hmm.
you opened up your own business, your consulting business with Elite Consulting. But where did the military come into play for you? And because you have again a unique background as a former well, always a Marine, right? But
Hey, hey, you got it
as,
right, brother. Rah.
hoorah, yeah. And again, appreciate your service, my brother. Appreciate your service. And
Absolutely.
yeah,
Appreciate
talk to me
that.
about that. Like, talk to me about how that all kind of transition. You talked about transition. Talk to me about this one.
Yeah, I really appreciate that question, because I think that captures it, right? I think it was yet another transition. So something that the very first thing I did upon graduating, I finished my doctoral at Florida State. And the
Mhm.
very first thing I did was actually I went into the academic pathway, and I was an assistant professor full time for a whole year. And I was focused on, primarily teaching in a very large course load. And I did that, every semester. And I had done that through my graduate studies, and I had done that here from an occupational standpoint. But yet again, I had another itch, right? I was like, you know what? I really like this. I'm enjoying this, but I think there's something more that that is more for me, right? At this specific time point. And for me, it was like, the main reason that this field and this craft appealed to me was the practice side, right? The application of it, the theory, the science, and applying it and disseminating that knowledge and that science to people who could really use it and apply it to up their game and level up in their domains. So once I made that realization after a year, post grad, I was like, you know what? Let me get into this, applied realm. Let me do that full time. And I was looking at a few different options there, and you mentioned my military background. So as a Marine Corps veteran, it's something that still feels and comes very naturally to me, just like that military culture, that military lingo, that environment. And I've always viewed it as just essentially a laboratory for high performance, right? For anytime we think about, what does it take to attain and sustain a level of high performance, a level of high standards, um, one of those, you know, first things that comes to mind in terms of like domains or performance capacities is the military, right? And I was like, you know what? This is a pretty unique opportunity. I was like, I can get back into that world and into that military space without necessarily being in it anymore myself. But man, it will allow me to immerse myself in that, in that lingo, in that culture, in that training and performing environment with people who are actively, doing that and pursuing it. So once I narrowed that down, I was able to find full-time employment with it. Like I said, I've been here in Colombia, so I primarily support Fort Jackson, which is in South Carolina, and that's the premier installation for basic training for the U.S. Army. And I've got this privilege to work with, and not only work with, but learn from just these high performers, right? From trainees to enlisted personnel to officers to working with groups, working on an individual basis, and it's been quite rewarding, and just something that, like I said, is still inherently enjoyable for me, and just appreciative of that.
That's awesome, man. And a lot of people, whether they're in the field or not, especially the early practitioners who are kind of getting their feet wet, understanding, or maybe are still in grad school for performance psychology, or looking to break in. A
Mm-hmm.
lot of them don't realize how much we see mental performance professionals working with the military. I mean, I was told, and I haven't said anything to know otherwise, is the military is the number one employer of mental coaches, because it's just so
Yeah.
widespread. Um,
Right.
and people don't realize that. And I have a lot of I have like some mentees of mine, and just people who like to pick my brain out. I tell them, like, take out this industry, take out this sector. And I had, like, even one of my former guests, Dr. Kellen Lee, who's with the San Francisco Giants.
Mm-hmm.
He
Mm-hmm.
started in the military, and now he's working with the Giants. So um
Nice.
that's why I want, that's a big reason why I want to bring you on, because you have that unique perspective that hopefully we can, I know we'll get some good insight from you. So, like, talk to me about that. Talk to me about your experience working, with the military, and also how your background, as a veteran, has helped you work with them.
Yeah. So with my background, it's almost like that riding a bike feeling, right? Or that principle of you never forget it. So once I got that opportunity to re-enter different branch, right,
Sure.
going from Marine Corps to Army.
Okay.
So there are definitely nuances, and those are definitely differences. But I was excited for that. I was like, I'm up for that challenge. I want to learn, what is shared, but also what's different, because I think really that is the key to doing great work, right? The key to doing effective work is connection, right? Your ability to tap into the art of what we are hired to do. And that really starts with what kind of relationships do you foster, your trustworthiness, your approachability. And for me, coming from that military background, it was a start, but I didn't want to lean on it, especially because it wasn't a direct Marine Corps to Marine Corps thing. So, really devoting the first few months to just learning those nuances, those intricacies, having those conversations with soldiers and with trainees was pretty rewarding. And I got to learn about what it's like for basic training for them, and what it's like nowadays as well. I think that's something that um, has changed, right, from the time that I served and the time that I completed basic training. There's a lot of differences now, and just paying attention to those things has been beneficial. And another element of your question I wanted to get to is, you know, how do they benefit? How does this apply to this sector? They, they deal with the same things. They have a lot of deadlines. They have a lot of pressure. They are consistently training. They have very rigorous standards. They are constantly getting feedback, right? That evaluation is always there. Um, it's just to the nth degree, right? Perhaps it's delivered in a different way. Perhaps the consequences are a bit more, dire. Some of them even reaching that life or death, scenario, whether for yourself or for someone else, for your battle buddies, for for your leadership. But that's something that I have found, right? These discussions and these conversations around building these intangibles that they cut across domains and sectors, right? It seems that confidence is pivotal. The desire to sustain motivation, right, in a healthy manner, how to um, better regulate one's emotions, how to incorporate imagery into a training program, cultivating a mindset for success, how to control your attentional capacity, right, to guide your decision making, and that's been pretty revealing. The fact that it cuts across, not just with the military, not with sport, but other individuals, other groups, other organizations that I've been privileged to work with, and just having those conversations, but also learning from those conversations. I think keeps me on my toes and on the edge of my craft, so that I can continue to help others help themselves to just a better state, a better a better way to attain their goals. So that's something that comes to mind when you ask that.
Yeah, I love it. And there's so much, like you mentioned, so much crossover between the different sectors of performance, right?
Yeah.
And I know my experience working with people in sports, business, entertainment, military. Yeah. It's, I'm like, as you're talking, I'm like, yeah. Because there's
Yeah.
not much. I mean, there's like, there's certain nuances, certain like details as far as like the craft and what they do.
Yes.
But when it comes down to the mental side and like, and the challenges that come with it, there's so much similarities there. So much crossover. And that's what I tell people, like, especially younger practitioners who are looking to break in. It's like, yeah, don't be so limited as far as I only want to work with this part, and that's fine if you do, but like
Mm-hmm.
also like
Mm-hmm.
just look at these different sectors and just understand, like, because I have people tell me like I don't know what the military is. I mean, I know what it is, but I mean I don't know how I would work with them. I've never
Mm-hmm.
served. I don't know, or I
Yeah.
don't know this sport or that. And I tell them, like, broaden your horizon. Trust me, there are a lot of people go into it like, hey, I had no clue, but hey, I'm going in, and they
Mm-hmm.
get so much out of it. So I think that's huge. That's huge to know. And because there is this, because when you have people who, especially, you served, but most people who are working, with the military, as far as on the mental side, a lot of them haven't, and they
Mm-hmm.
understand the mental side of performance, but they're kind of going in a little blind until they
Mm-hmm.
realize,
Mm-hmm.
oh, there's not too much difference than sports or whatever my specialty is.
Yeah. Yeah. For sure.
Uh, so walk with me as far as like the day to day. What are some things that you work on, during your time working with the military population? Because and I know for a fact there's a few people who are going to listen to this, who are thinking about working with the military.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So like, talk to us about that. Talk to us about the certain things that you work on, during your time with Magellan.
Yeah, that's understandable, right? Those hesitations, or those just those pump the brake moments of like, whoa, like, man, that's a different world. I have no business in there. Like you said, I've never served. I never even thought about that. Never crossed my mind. I'm seeing this job posting, but it's like I would never, or they would never. And I think that's understandable.
Mhm.
And in terms of like a day to day, I think that might provide some insight into how to mitigate some of those hesitations and concerns. Is one of the main things that appeal to me is I really like this idea of being a free spirit, being able to work outdoors, working out in the field. I think in the spirit of applying performance psychology principles, I also think about being able to apply it in real time, in real life scenarios. And what better way to do that than meeting the client where they're at, right? Because it could also mean, where are they physically, right, in space and time? Go out and meet them. Go out and have a chat with them. Go out and just watch, because you learn a lot just by doing that. I think a lot of times we got we get excited, we get maybe even we start thinking about, what am I going to talk about? What research article do I want to share with a client or with a group? What theory might I be able to integrate here, and would it be beneficial in this instance? And that's all important. That's all critical. But learning about this specific environment, whatever that may be, whether it's the military, whether it's performing arts, whether it's business, especially if it's novel to an individual, well, you lean into that. You lean into that, and I have found that asking questions, for the most part, people actually are very receptive to that. They appreciate the opportunity to tell their story and say, well, this is what my day to day is like. This is what my work environment is like. This is what my manager and leader are like. These are the standards that are imposed. These are the standards that are enforced. This is how I feel about it. And just kind of going with that, it really turns into this organic conversation. And that whole time, you're downloading valuable data in terms of, oh, this is what it's like for you, right? Specifically with what you do on a daily basis. This is what it's like. This is what you wake up to. This is where you're asked to perform. And these are some of the specific obstacles or parameters in which you're asked to, show up at your very best consistently. I think once you get that part, once you have that, then you're able to really dig deeper and then get into things that, that we're taught, that we're learned, we receive, very specialized training on. So again, they're very important, right? So you do get that time, that opportunity to get back into it and then think about, okay, where might theory have a place in this, right? In this particular case, or with this particular client. What does the science say here, right? What are some do's? What are some don'ts? And then just merging that, I think that helps alleviate some of that tension in terms of like, I don't know, like I don't know where to start. I don't know how to frame this in a way that would be helpful or applicable to the person in front of me. Something that I do and that I appreciate doing is just being out there, right? Being out there, being in the trenches, going out, observing, asking those questions, being able to see them while performing, right? While executing tasks. And it's interesting because I think a lot of times we hear that word, or we use that word, performing or performance, and we immediately start to think about some kind of like, physical negotiation of like an obstacle course, or like, you're going on a run, and sure, those all capture performance, but they also have a lot of like academic performances, right? Like sitting down, taking an exam, that's a performance, right? In the case of the military, engaging in drill and ceremony, right? Marching procedures, that's performing. Qualifying with your weapon, things like that. So these unique layers to human performance are very exciting, and they're very revealing if you just stop to really watch, to ask, and you lean in with curiosity. And there's ample opportunities for that, I think, across different performance domains and sectors.
Love it. Yeah, a lot of good points there, man. And so speaking of like, you talked about being with them in their environment, right? Which I think is a key component, regardless of the sector that people might be working in, whether it's working, with military in the field, or working with athletes, on the football field, on the court, whatever playing surface, with performing artists on the stage, it's one thing to be in their element, and it's another thing to like, as compared to like in an office setting, right?
Right.
Yeah, get some work done in like an office setting, but I've always appreciated the importance of putting them in where they're comfortable, putting them where they're performing. And then, there's room for both, right? Like there's stuff you can work on one-on-one and then say, okay, let's go try it out. Next time you're training, next time you're at practice, next time you're
Mm-hmm.
performing,
Right.
all that stuff. So like, what are some specific examples? Because you talked about being being out there with them, and share what you can. Don't get too deep, but
Of course. Right.
what are some specific examples as far as like maybe do some like are you working with them directly during the drills? Are you talking to them after, before? And if again, feel free to share what you can.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a great question. Um, so I get to do a little bit of it all, right? I get to do work prior to a performance, sometimes during a performance. It depends on what it is that they're doing. Um, and then also after. And a lot of it, sure, it can be structured, it can have a specific, training date and time and topic. And I love doing that, but a lot of it just happens, right? That's the beauty about the field. That's the beauty of going out and observing and supporting um, in an unplanned and unstructured way is that you leave room for flexibility. So a lot of times it's just whatever comes up, I just follow that, right? So hey, I noticed you're doing this. Walk me through, what are you focused on right now, right? And based on things like that, that'll lead me to perhaps the next question, or just helping them really process, maybe, maybe this isn't going to work out the way that I would like to, but it's because I'm, looking at it from this perspective and not that perspective. Or maybe it's because, I got a piece of feedback and it's ruined my day, right? Because I've allowed it to ruin my day. It went from a 5 minute, one-on-one to it just ruined my day, and now it's going to impact, me at home, me for the rest of the training day, me during, my next meal. So just really getting into the different questions based on what I'm watching, what they're sharing, what they're comfortable sharing. A lot of it just comes through, this, just having that one-on-one, really getting those moments to get to know people, to get to better understand um, how they're interpreting situations, and the narratives that they're creating, that they are telling themselves, that they are retelling themselves, and just, challenging them to think about, well, how's that working out for you, right? Is that the narrative that you want to proceed with? If so, fantastic. If not, then where to now, right? What adjustments would you like to make? And I think that's also a moment that they appreciate, because it's a challenge, but also an opportunity for them to fill in the blank themselves, right? So not necessarily giving them advice, or spoon feeding them, hey, try this. It's just giving them that time and space to slow down, and allowing them to think about, what, based on, what's been happening here, I think I'm going to stop that, and I think I'm going to start this instead. And then let's go back to the drawing board, and let's see what that got us. So that's something that I find myself doing, pretty much anytime that those opportunities present themselves, which is quite a lot in a training environment with such high frequency and volume here.
Yeah. Yeah, it's good insight, man. I appreciate that. And people listening, especially people working in the field, that they know, like they're listening to this, and they're like, "Oh yeah, that happened in sports too. Oh yeah, that happens in business, and the performing arts and all this stuff." And that's what we're saying, right? There's so much crossover between that. Um, Now you get some good insight as far as the practical side. And you have mentioned something that's interesting, and which I want to touch on now.
Sure.
As far as the other side of it, as far as the research side, because you mentioned to me before, that you have a little bit of a passion, for that side. So talk to me about that. Talk to me about some things that you've been interested in looking into, or maybe some stuff that you've done in the past.
Yeah, yeah. So research that is there's still a gap, right? There's still a gap, as most of us know and would admit, that gap between research to practice, right? How do we figure out an effective way to bring these psychological theories and models and research articles and make sense of it, understand it, but translate that into layman terms that are going to be not just layman, but also context specific, right? That are going to be of benefit to the individuals, to the groups, to the teams that we're supporting, to the units that we're supporting, so that not only are they interested, they're bought into the idea of, wow, yeah, that's totally relevant here, right? That's exactly what I'm looking to level up on. And now I have a better idea of not just what is this skill, what is this technique, but why it's effective in the first place, right? What am I going to get out of it? What's my team going to get out of it? And importantly, how do I use this, right? How do I use this while I'm actually, running 2 miles? How do I use this while I'm going to lead a 1 hour meeting, going over a report? Or how do I use this, while I'm on stage playing, the piano, whatever that case may be? I think that gap is something that I'm very excited about that, right? Always keeping that critical thinking cap on and seeing, all right, I think based on this scenario, based on whatever this case is, theoretical framework X might be relevant here. Here's why. Here's where I think it would apply. Based on that, perhaps here are some pretty important, contemporary research findings. Here's what the science is telling us. Let me see how I can, merge that and bring this to the table with the client. Again, not saying do this, but having a conversation of here's another tool, right? Here's another potential action step. What do you think that would look like for you? What would be a good first step to incorporate it? What are your questions about it? And, getting them to really wrestle with the idea of alternatives, right? Because a lot of times we find that clients have not really thought about the only things they've thought about, right? Until they have this opportunity or these sessions with us, they're like, well, you're right. There are more options. I just didn't consider it. So adding those options and then just letting them make that, final judgment call of, I think here's what I'm going to do next. Let's chat. Let's circle back in a week. Let's circle back tomorrow. Or if you got time right now, stick around. Let's see how we can incorporate this now. Right. So I also think that it goes the other direction. So the gap between research to practice, but I also think about there's a gap between practice and research, right? And I think many of us, we were trained with this model of practice, being a scientist practitioner, and like I said, using theory, using science to guide your practice and to your approach. I also find myself using that same idea, but also the inverse is also applicable, right? So in my work, I've picked up on a few observations, a few things that I've been curious about, and that has led me to a research question. And I'm like, you know what? There's not much out there on this, or if there is, it's dated. And just kind of using those things to formulate my own questions, my own ideas, develop and design my own studies, conducting those, and using essentially my practice to generate new science and the cycle just, it feeds off each other, right? Research to practice, but also practice to research, and then using that to stay on the cutting edge of my craft and what we do. And that's been something that I really am passionate about, and it's something that I try to leverage in my work.
Love it, man. Yeah, and that it's that stuff that goes on behind the scenes that a lot of people aren't aware of, right? They see the stuff that we work on as far as on the practicing this stuff in the field, but that stuff comes from somewhere. All these different applications and what we work on, the different activities, all this stuff, it comes from somewhere, and that's why I too just understand like the importance of, and that's why even when I'm teaching, when I put my professor hat on too, I was telling my students the importance of being up to date with the research. Even if you're going to cite an article, make sure it's recent. Don't cite something even from like the 80s, 90s. Like that's
right. Yeah.
There's research being done every single second, and and what might have been found even 10, 15, 20 years ago might have, maybe, that body of knowledge maybe might not be as current, and so, and that's why I think it's so important for, people, whether on the research side or practical side or both, to kind of just keep up to date with this stuff and to be current, and just to sit and not to say like, oh, well, I know everything now, and then we just go with this, because this new stuff coming out, and maybe we thought something was effective and maybe not so much. And, we could look into it and say, okay, I like that. Or maybe I could see, applying that in my practice. Right. If I'm a practitioner. But I think that, there's so much importance of that a lot of people don't realize. And it's tough. It's a tough process to go through all that. And that's why we have to, again, and I'm huge on critical thinking. I can't tell you how I love that. When you mentioned that, I was like, yes. Because
absolutely,
we need to be critical thinking, even just as a general consumer, or just here, because we have so much stuff in the media these days, right? That they're telling us this and that. And people who are just like, who are trusting the opinions of someone on TikTok versus the research, versus what we're finding. And there's so many different examples just in different areas, but we just kind of, coming back to this, it's we have to understand there is an importance, and there's definitely a place, for research, and for people who are listening, or, students, or maybe practitioners, there's definitely a place there. And, and you can think about, okay, that's a research start. It's like, we're like a general problem or an issue. Like you think, oh, like I'm seeing this happen. Why?
Right.
Why is this happening? Or how can I fix it? And that's kind of how it all starts. Right.
And nothing's ever final, right? Everything is fluid. Everything is transient. And like you said, it all comes from somewhere. Right. Yeah. And it's all continuous, right? Across disciplines, across industries. Like you said, there's research being conducted and published every day. And it's a big thing to think about and really let sink in, but it's not a bad thing, right? You mentioned the word being consumers, right? Consuming science, as well as, it's okay to evaluate, right? The science, put it into practice, see if it's having the impact that you thought it would have, or that, an article revealed it would have. But also, I think it's okay to generate science, right? To advance your own, to capitalize on your observations, to advance, your field, to try to get, a leg up on some of the things that are relevant in your practice, with the people that we work with the teams that we work with. So I think it's the consuming, it's the leveraging the data, the science, the research, but also generating it. And it's an X factor. I think it's also important, and it's critical, because it helps really distinguish us as practitioners, as trained, specialized, competent, and ethical practitioners, not just because we have the education behind us and the certification behind us, but because we know how to do that, right? We're trained how to do that, and we uphold that standard of science to practice. And because I think if you take that away from the equation, then it's hard to really distinguish between so much that's out there, right? The plethora of motivational speakers, of self-help gurus, of self-help books, of social media influencers, of hey man, like, why can't I just YouTube this? Why can't I just TikTok, about ways to build my confidence? And it's like, if you don't have a clear and honest, reason, not just for clients, but for yourself to really understand, well, this is a better way because it's got to be a robust answer. And I think, coming from that scientific lens, coming from that academic perspective, but, being up to the task of ultimately translating that. And again, that's the art of what we do, translating that in a way that's applicable, that is digestible for the people that receive our services and that we support. And I think that's where the magic happens. But it's definitely an X factor if we want to not just stay relevant, but be really effective in what we do. So I thought that was a very great point that you brought up there as well, with the consumption, but also being able to bring something unique, right, a value add to the industries that we work with.
Amen, my brother. Amen. Preach. No, it's good stuff, man. Hey, I appreciate you coming on, man. You brought a lot of heat, a lot of fire, a lot of insight today. And I definitely appreciate your perspective, because, you have a very unique one. That's what I wanted to bring you on. So, thank you so much for coming on. Now,
Absolutely,
if there was someone listening and wanted to kind of, follow your journey or get in contact with you, what would be the best way to do that?
Yeah. So you can find me across most of the social media outlets. You can follow me on LinkedIn. I'm pretty active on that one. So on LinkedIn, you could find me under Dr. Elmer Castillo, Dr. Elmer Castillo, CMPC. You can find me on Twitter. So my Twitter handle is @Dr. Elmer Castillo. So my first name, last name. And you can find me on Instagram as well. So for that one, it's my private practice. So it's elite_consulting. Yeah, I think those are my primary ones for now. And going back on that Instagram, it's actually elite_consulting_EC, my initials, elite_consulting_EC. Yeah, happy to connect, happy to chat with anyone and everyone.
There you go. Go follow him, guys. Well, again, thank you so much, my friend, for coming on, man.
Yeah, man. I appreciate the invite. Always a pleasure and a privilege to talk shop, and, looking forward to hopefully connecting here in person at some point, whether it's at a conference or just wherever, life decides to cross paths. But I really do appreciate reaching out, and I hope there's some value for your listeners and for your audience, man. Pleasure.
Absolutely. You brought a lot of value, and I don't know whether to say hoorah or huh, but because
it's always going to be hoorah for me.
Hoorah. Got it.
Yep.
All right, man. Well, hey, thank you so much for my guest, my good friend, Dr. Elmer Castillo, for coming on today. Thank you, the listener, for watching. If you like what you see, click on that Dr. Coach Show logo below. Subscribe. Tell your friends. Tell your family. Take care of yourselves and each other. Thank you very much.